My husband left me stranded in a quiet Italian hamlet after a fiery argument, convinced I'd crawl back to him. I didn't. Now he's frantically searching for me. Let's see how she fares, Ethan sneered, slamming the car door with a thud. The crimson glow of our rental car's taillights faded around a cobblestone corner, leaving only dust and the faint chuckles of his friends. I stood frozen, my words hanging in the air. What started as a petty squabble outside a charming cafe was dwarfed by a shocking betrayal. "He'll come back," I murmured, drawing curious glances from nearby diners. This is just another of his power plays. But as minutes turned to hours, a knot tightened in my chest. Dusk cloaked the unfamiliar village, its name unknown to me. I hadn't anticipated Ethan's heavy drinking at lunch, despite my objections. His college friends, gathered for their annual reunion, a trip I'd begrudgingly joined, egged him on. When I urged us to head back to the hotel, Leo scoffed, "She's always controlling you," before ordering another round. Ethan followed me outside, his speech slurred, but his anger sharp. Years of buried resentment erupted into a vicious row. "Your purse has your passport, right?" he snapped before sliding into the driver's seat. "You'll figure it out. You're always so smart, telling me what to do." As night settled, the weight of my situation sank in. The quaint village now felt menacing. A quick check revealed I had only €75, barely enough for a night's stay, let alone a trip home. Ethan held my credit cards, a setup he'd insisted on for ease. With my small bag nearly empty, I found a simple room above a patisserie, its bare walls offering little solace. The elderly landlady, speaking no English, gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "He's gone," I whispered, glancing at my phone. 30 missed calls from Ethan, all ignored. Texts poured in, but I scrolled past them. I tried reaching Leo and the others, only to find they'd blocked me. A chilling truth hit me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was calculated to break me. Sleep came in fits, disrupted by compulsive phone checks and waves of dread. By morning, I clung to hope that Ethan would return, full of apologies, blaming the alcohol and calling it a cruel joke. I'd be furious, but relieved to slip back into our manicured life in Boston, where he was a celebrated architect and I was the supportive wife who'd sidelined her dreams for his. But he didn't come back. On the second day, I stretched my euros, buying only a roll as I scoured the town for signs of our group. By evening, I learned they'd left for Florence without me. On the third day, a kind cafe owner, seeing my distress, offered me tea and pointed me to the police station. The officer, weary from dealing with lost tourists, listened patiently, but the language gap left me with only a filed report and a pitying smile. That afternoon, I made the hardest decision of my life. Standing outside a pawn shop, I slipped off my wedding ring, a sparkling 2-carat diamond Ethan had given me on our 5th anniversary, replacing our modest original band. The pawnbroker offered a fraction of its worth, but it was enough for my next step. "Go back to America? Call your family," he suggested, handing me euros. I nodded vaguely, but a new plan was taking shape. Family meant facing questions. My mother's inevitable "I told you so" about Ethan's temper and friends who'd seen the cracks I'd hidden. At the bus station, I studied the departure board, its destinations whispering possibilities. An overnight bus to Rome connected to ferries and routes Ethan would never suspect. My finger lingered over my father's contact. One call could secure a ticket home, back to a life of shrinking myself to fit Ethan's demands. "Why complicate things?" he'd said when I mentioned restarting my design career. "We don't need the money, and I need you focused on us." I dismissed it then. Now, in that rundown station, I saw it for what it was, a link in the chain he'd built around me. "Destination?" the ticket agent asked, her kind eyes noting my hesitation. "Greece," I said, the word feeling like freedom. "The smallest coastal village you've got." 14 hours later, I stepped off the final bus, exhausted and stiff. The village, its name a mystery, shimmered with whitewashed homes, sea breezes, and olive trees. My phone died somewhere between borders. Hunger gnawed at me, and the weight of my choices pressed down. 3 days of emotional upheaval left me raw, torn between rage, fear, and a surprising spark of peace. With my remaining euros, I rented a cheap room for 2 nights. Beyond that, I had no plan, no connections, and only a handful of Greek phrases. But as I watched the sunset paint the Aegean in hues of gold and rose, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Ethan meant to teach me a lesson in submission. Instead, he'd set me free. The months after Ethan's betrayal unfolded like chapters in a story I was destined to write. As autumn draped the olive groves in amber, I sank into the village's rhythm. Daphne and Giannis, my hosts, became more than guides, they became family. The first harvest festival when October arrived, the village buzzed with preparations for its olive harvest festival. "You'll help with the tasting table," Daphne declared, handing me a linen apron stitched with the farm's name. The role felt significant. I was no longer a passerby, but part of something vital. The festival dawned bright and vibrant. Locals and visitors flocked to our stall, eager to taste our new oil. To my surprise, many knew me. "The American who crafts the finest olive soap," Old Man Nikos called, his eyes gleaming. Maria, my stall neighbor, teased, "You're practically a legend, Claire. Soon they'll sing about you." A letter from the past one rainy afternoon, while sorting the farm's records, I found a bundle of faded letters in a wooden box. Daphne's hands shook as she touched the Australian postmarks. "My Irene," she whispered. Together, we drafted a reply to her daughter after 15 years of silence. My fingers paused over the laptop as Daphne spoke in halting English, her voice thick with longing. "Tell her I keep her bed made. And now I have another daughter." The reply came 3 weeks later, brimming with photos of Irene's children and an invitation to visit. That night, over Giannis's homemade wine, I felt our lives weave tighter. The storm that shattered winter brought fierce storms to our seaside village. One wild night, as gales tore through the groves, a deafening crack rang out. With lanterns in hand, we found 3 ancient trees split by lightning. Giannis sank to his knees in the mud, touching the scorched bark. "These were my grandfathers," he said, voice breaking. I saw then what the grove meant, a living tie to their past. The next morning, I surprised myself. "I'll help replant," I said. "Not just 3 trees, but a whole new grove." Daphne's eyes glistened as Giannis gripped my shoulder. "We'll name it Claire's Grove," he said. An unexpected guest spring brought a shock. At the market, a familiar Boston accent cut through the crowd. "Claire, is that you?" My old college friend, Laura, stared, stunned, her designer scarf framing her disbelief as I stood in work boots, explaining olive oil to French tourists. Over thick Greek coffee, I shared my journey. Laura listened, then shook her head. "Boston thinks you're in some fancy Swiss clinic. Ethan's been saying you needed time away, but his firm's crumbling without you. You held those clients together." As she left with a promise to keep my secret and a crate of our best oil, I felt no anger, only gratitude for my new life. The future grows walking through Claire's Grove, watching the saplings thrive. I marvel at my path. The woman Ethan left in Italy feels like a distant memory. Daphne and Giannis teach me ancient ways, reading the sky, the birds, singing to the trees as we harvest. Next month, Irene and her family will visit after 20 years. Yesterday, as we bottled our latest oil, Giannis spoke. "When the time comes, this land goes to both my daughters." The olive trees murmur in the breeze, their ancient trunks enduring storms, like the human spirit. Ethan thought he'd broken me. Instead, he gave me the gift of finding myself. When summer's heat settled over the groves, a letter from Athens arrived. I nearly dropped my olive basket when Daphne called me, her voice trembling. "Official documents," she said, adjusting her glasses. "About the land." The papers, stamped with formal seals, were clear. The government claimed part of our western grove for a new road. Giannis paled at the compensation offer. "These are the trees that survived the war," he whispered. That night, we pored over maps at the kitchen table. My hands, roughened by farm work, traced routes as my mind, once sharp in Boston boardrooms, sought answers. "There's a heritage law," I recalled. My old firm used it in Tuscany. Reviving the designer for the first time in years, I opened my old portfolio. Dusting off my skills, I drafted proposals to reroute the road, sparing our trees. The village council, wary of the outsider, slowly embraced my plan. You speak for us in Athens, old man Stavros urged. You bridge both worlds. In Athens, in a simple dress and worn sandals, I felt a new strength, not Ethan's shallow status, but purpose. When I finished my presentation, even the stern officials clapped. Irene's return, the victory party overlapped with Irene's arrival. When her taxi stopped, Daphne froze. Her daughter, unseen for decades, stood with her husband and 2 teens. You're Claire, Irene said, hugging me. Mama writes about you constantly. Walking the groves, Irene admitted she'd feared returning, ashamed of abandoning her roots. Seeing what you've done here, I wonder what I've given up, she said. The Boston Ripple, my Athens triumph reached American magazines, from Socialite to Grove Guardian. Orders for our oil soared, and a top culinary school asked me to teach Mediterranean cuisine. Then came an email from my old mentor. Ethan's firm lost a major contract. He's been asking about you. I deleted it without responding. That night, I dreamed of Boston's icy streets, but woke to orange blossoms. I had no ties left there. A new legacy. The biggest surprise came during harvest. Irene's 15-year-old, Sophia, begged to learn the old ways. As Giannis taught her to judge olive ripeness, just as he'd taught me, he said, you'll both inherit the grove one day. Daphne squeezed my hand. No words were needed. The trees we saved, the traditions we kept, the family we forged, these roots run deep. Ethan's abandonment was the start, not the end. As autumn rains fall, I know the greatest love stories aren't always about romance, but about finding where you truly belong.